Today we will be learning about the categories and stages of stress. Stress can be categorized into 3 different general categories, and these are acute stress, episodic acute stress, and chronic stress. Acute stress refers to a short-term stress response that occurs in reaction to a specific, identifiable event or situation. This type of stress is typically sudden in onset and is triggered by immediate demands or perceived threats, such as an upcoming exam, a work deadline, an argument, a medical emergency, or a near-miss accident. The body responds through the fight or flight response, releasing stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which increase heart rate, sharpen focus, and prepare the individual to respond to the challenge. Importantly, acute stress is time-limited and resolves once the triggering event has passed or the situation is managed. After the stressor is removed, the body gradually returns to its normal state. In small to moderate amounts, acute stress can be adaptive and even beneficial, as it can enhance alertness, motivation, and performance. However, if acute stress is intense or occurs repeatedly without adequate recovery, it may contribute to physical symptoms such as headaches, muscle tension, or fatigue, and emotional responses such as irritability or anxiety. Episodic acute stress is a form of acute stress that occurs when an individual is repeatedly exposed to stressful events or situations over time, rather than as a one-off experience. While each stress response is short-term, the frequent or ongoing nature of the stress triggers means the body is repeatedly activated into a state of heightened alertness. This type of stress is commonly associated with lifestyles or environments characterized by constant demands, time pressure, and high expectations, such as heavy workloads, ongoing family responsibilities, financial strain, or regularly occurring conflicts. People experiencing episodic acute stress often report persistent feelings of being rushed, overwhelmed, or out of control, along with a sense that they are always under pressure. Because stress responses occur so often, there is limited opportunity for physical and psychological recovery between episodes. Over time, this can lead to ongoing symptoms such as irritability, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, muscle tension, headaches, and disrupted sleep. Although episodic acute stress is still classified as acute rather than chronic, its repetitive nature increases the risk of longer-term health consequences if not addressed. Without effective coping strategies or changes to the underlying stresses, episodic acute stress can contribute to burnout, reduced performance, and the development of stress-related physical and mental health conditions. Chronic stress refers to a prolonged and persistent stress response that occurs when an individual is exposed to ongoing stresses that are unresolved or cannot easily be resolved. Unlike acute or episodic acute stress, chronic stress develops when the body remains in a sustained state of physiological and psychological arousal over weeks, months, or even years. This can occur when a person feels trapped in difficult circumstances with little perceived control or opportunity for relief. Because the stress response is activated continuously, chronic stress places significant strain on multiple body systems. Long-term exposure to elevated stress hormones, particularly cortisol, can disrupt immune function, increase inflammation, and contribute to the development of serious health conditions such as cardiovascular disease, hypertension, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic disorders, and weakened immunity. Chronic stress is also strongly associated with mental health impacts, including anxiety disorders, depression, emotional exhaustion, and impaired coping capacity. Importantly, chronic stress can lead to lasting neurobiological changes. Prolonged stress exposure has been linked to structural and functional changes in brain regions involved in memory, emotion regulation, and decision-making, such as the hippocampus, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex. These changes may affect learning, concentration, emotional regulation, and stress resilience, and in some cases can have long-term or permanent effects if stress is severe or experienced during critical developmental periods. Examples of stresses that commonly lead to chronic stress include living in an abusive or unsafe home environment, long-term poverty or financial insecurity, ongoing discrimination, chronic illness, and prolonged caregiving responsibilities. Because chronic stress often arises from systemic or entrenched social conditions, effective management typically requires not only individual coping strategies, but also social, environmental, or structural interventions to reduce or eliminate the underlying stresses. When exposed to stress, our body goes through a three-stage process called Selye's General Adaption Syndrome, GAS. These stages are alarm reaction, resistance, and exhaustion. The alarm reaction stage is the first stage of the body's stress response and occurs immediately after a stressor is perceived. During this stage, the brain identifies a threat, whether real or perceived, and sends an alarm signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus acts as a central control center, activating two key systems, the sympathetic nervous system and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis. As part of this process, glucocorticoids are released, which stimulate the secretion of stress hormones, primarily adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol. Adrenaline acts rapidly, triggering immediate physiological changes that prepare the body for action. These changes include an increased heart rate and blood pressure, faster breathing to improve oxygen delivery, and the mobilization of glucose into the bloodstream to provide a quick source of energy for muscles and the brain. The cortisol supports this response by maintaining energy availability over a longer period. It increases blood glucose levels, enhances the brain's use of glucose, and temporarily suppresses non-essential functions such as digestion, growth, and aspects of the immune response. Together, these hormonal changes sharpen focus, heighten alertness, and increase physical readiness. Collectively, these responses prepare the body to deal with the stressor through what is commonly referred to as the fight or flight response. While this reaction is adaptive and protective in the short term, allowing an individual to respond effectively to danger or challenge, repeated or prolonged activation of the alarm reaction can contribute to physical and psychological strain if the stressor is ongoing. The resistance stage is the second stage of the stress response and occurs when the body continues to be exposed to a stressor after the initial alarm reaction. During this stage, the body attempts to adapt to the stress and restore internal balance, homeostasis, while remaining alert and prepared to respond if needed. Although the stressor is still present, the body shifts from an immediate emergency response to a more sustained coping mode. Physiologically, some of the heightened responses seen in the alarm stage begin to stabilize. Blood glucose levels start to decrease as energy demands become more regulated. Heart rate and blood pressure reduce from their initial peak, and cortisol levels begin to decline. However, these measures may not return fully to baseline, as the body maintains a moderate level of stress hormone production to support ongoing vigilance and coping. During the resistance stage, the body prioritizes essential functions while continuing to suppress or limit non-essential processes, such as digestion, growth, and aspects of immune function. This allows the individual to maintain performance and function despite ongoing stress. Psychologically, people may feel as though they are coping or managing, even though they remain under pressure. If the stressor is resolved during this stage, the body is able to successfully return to normal functioning with hormone levels stabilizing and physiological systems recovering. However, if the stressor persists, stress hormones, particularly cortisol, continue to be released, and the body remains in a prolonged state of readiness. Over time, this sustained activation can place strain on body systems and, if unrelieved, may progress to the exhaustion stage, where coping resources become depleted. The exhaustion stage is the final stage of the stress response and occurs when stress is chronic or prolonged and the body is no longer able to sustain heightened levels of physiological arousal. After extended exposure to stresses, the body's emotional, physical, and cognitive resources become depleted, and its ability to adapt or cope effectively is significantly reduced. At this point, the systems that were initially activated to protect the individual begin to break down. During the exhaustion stage, prolonged activation of stress hormones, particularly cortisol, contributes to widespread fatigue and a sense of physical and emotional burnout. Energy reserves are diminished, concentration and motivation decline, and individuals may experience feelings of hopelessness, irritability, or emotional numbness. Mental functioning is often impaired, with difficulties in memory, decision-making, and problem-solving becoming more pronounced. Physiologically, the immune system becomes weakened due to long-term suppression, increasing vulnerability to infections and slowing recovery from illness or injury. Chronic inflammation may also develop, contributing to longer-term health problems such as cardiovascular disease, gastrointestinal disorders, sleep disturbances, and metabolic conditions. At the same time, stress tolerance is significantly reduced, meaning that even minor stresses can feel overwhelming and trigger disproportionate emotional or physical reactions. If the exhaustion stage is not addressed, it can result in serious physical and mental health consequences, including clinical depression, anxiety disorders, and stress-related illnesses. Recovery typically requires meaningful reduction or removal of stresses, adequate rest, psychological support, and, in some cases, medical or therapeutic intervention to restore the body's capacity to regulate stress effectively.